In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between bitmap or raster graphics and vector graphics. And we're also going to look at some of the vector tools that are available within Photoshop. Now, Photoshop primarily deals with raster or bitmap graphics. Bitmap is just another word for raster. And when you're looking at a photograph, that's what you're looking at right here. A photo is going to be a raster image. Now, what a raster image or a bitmap image is it is made up of little tiny colored squares that are called pixels. That's why when we zoom in on this, pretty soon we get to the point where we're not looking at a smooth image anymore, but we're looking at little tiny squares. Each of these squares is just a single color, and they're all aligned in a way that when they zoom out enough, when they become small enough, we see the image that we want to see. So that is what a raster image is. Now, vector images are quite different, and the primary application you'll be working with vector with is Illustrator. And you'll learn a lot about using the vector tools in the Illustrator class. But Photoshop does have some vector capabilities as well. Let's go ahead and hide this. Let's make a new layer. And I'm going to just go to one of my vector tools here, which is the ellipse tool. And I'm going to draw a circle here. So, what a vector image is, let's go ahead and bring up my bounding box. It is made up of points and lines, and the lines are called paths. So there's 4 points on this circle, and then there are these curved paths that are going from point to point. Now, the thing about vector images is rather than being created by little squares, they are actually being created mathematically. There's an algorithm in the application that is telling the program how to draw the vector image that you want drawn. So in this case, how to draw this circle. Now this circle is very simple, but there are extremely complex vector images, even some that are photorealistic and very difficult to tell apart from photographs. The advantage of a vector graphic is that it can be resized without any loss of quality. So a raster image has a specific resolution, and if you make it too big, then it starts to lose quality and doesn't look very good. Even if you make it too small, it loses some quality and won't look as good. Vector images can be resized to any size you want because the computer just redraws it based upon the math, and you end up losing no quality at all. Now, the paths are invisible lines, and the paths can have strokes or fills applied to them. So the fill is the color inside of the path, and then the stroke would be the color of the path itself. Now, there are several tools available to make vector images in Photoshop. The ones that we have the pen tool, which we looked at in our first video, where we just click points and drag out these handles to create curves. Or if we don't drag the handles, then we get straight lines and corners. So a vector drawing tool. In addition to the pen tool, we have down below that the ellipse tool. So if I click and hold, yours is probably on the rectangle tool. The ellipse tool is 2 below that. The keyboard shortcuts for these shape tools is the letter U. Now when I draw a vector shape, so I've drawn this circle here with the ellipse tool, again, I'm choosing if I want this to be a path or a shape or pixels. I'm going to keep this vector and go as a shape. And now I can go ahead and I've got options for my fill or my stroke. So the fill, again, is going to be the color of the shape itself. The stroke is going to be the color of the stroke around it. So that one created as a path because I had that selected. So I've changed it to shape now. Now I'm going to come and I'm going to draw it, and you see I've got a yellow circle with no stroke. If I were to come up here and say I wanted it to be a yellow circle with a blue stroke, then now I've got a yellow circle with a blue stroke. So I adjust those up in the control panel. It needs to be on shape in order to fill or stroke it. Otherwise, you're creating a path, which is more for selections and things like that. If I hold Shift while using the ellipse tool, then it will make a perfect circle. It locks the height and width together. And that's the case with the other tools we're going to look at, like the rectangle tool and the rounded rectangle tool and so on and so forth. So if I go to the rectangle tool, the one at the top here, again, I can choose my options here before I draw it, my fill, my stroke, how thick my stroke is there, and then I just click and drag to make the rectangle. the rounded rectangle tool. If I come to the rounded rectangle tool, I click and drag, and you can see that the corners are rounded. Now, before I drag it, I can choose how round the corners are. So it's a 10 pixel radius of a curve. If I change that to be a 50 pixel radius and then draw, you'll see that I have much more round corners. Also under here, I have the polygon tool, which just draws a polygon. And before I draw it, I can decide how many sides I want the polygon to have up there in the control panel. And then we looked a little bit, well, let's look at the line tool first of all. Quite simple, just draws a line. If I hold shift, it locks that line to multiples of 45-degree angles. But again, this is a vector shape. Now, the last one here is the one we already looked at, the custom shape tool. We have all the shape library up here, but just so you know, you can actually download just thousands of free custom shapes online. If you just Google Photoshop custom shapes, you can download ones and you can add them to your shapes right here. Click New. You can also draw your own shape using the pen tool, and then you can go up to Edit and Define Custom Shape. It's right here, it's grayed out because I don't actually have a pen tool drawn thing, and that will create a custom shape for it that I can then get to with a single click at any time. So those are the vector tools that are built into Photoshop. Again, you can use them to draw buttons or things that you're going to use along with your illustration. You can use them to make selections, and they can resize without any loss of quality. Now, if you've drawn something in Illustrator, Illustrator's native file format is the AI extension, .ai. AI files can be imported into Photoshop, can be placed into Photoshop. You can also copy and paste from Illustrator to Photoshop, and so that's a way to bring even more complex vector shapes into Photoshop if you need to. Now, one last thing about vector shapes. You cannot apply layer styles to a vector image until you have rasterized it. You also can't draw on it. There's a bunch of things you can't do to it. So if I come here and I draw this circle, if I were to come and try to use my brush tool on this, you see it says no. And if I try to click it, it says it has to be rasterized first. If I come down and try to apply a style to it, it won't let me. Rasterizing means converting it from vector to raster or bitmap. So it's basically going to create it as a pixelized image. No longer will I have the ability to resize it without loss of quality, but I will have the ability to do things like paint over it, give effects to it, or anything like that. To rasterize it, like you saw, I can just try to do something that it won't let me, and then it'll give me the option to rasterize right there. Or I can manually decide to rasterize it by going up to Layer and then coming down to Rasterize, and I'll just rasterize the shape or the whole layer. We'll just do the layer, and you'll see that now that is a rasterized layer, and it will allow me to draw on it without any issues or apply effect to it as well. So that is vector in Photoshop. Again, primarily we're going to be working with raster in this program, but the vector tools are quite powerful and give us a lot more options.